Hey, everybody, welcome back to our show. We have changed the name of it to Social Skills Unscripted. And this is where Ramiro and I talk about things that are going on with our students here at Starfish just on a day-to-day basis. Some of it is related to things that have to do with our lesson for that week, but most of it is just conversations that come up, things that are said, the questions that the kids ask, things that we talk about, things that we problem solve as we go through. Today's episode is a little bit different because we just came back from spring break, but I am still on the other side of the world. So we are recording this from my hotel room on the other side of the world on my phone. Because the only thing I forgot to bring on this trip, which I'm super proud of myself for only not bringing one thing, the only thing I forgot to bring was the charging cord for my computer. But in the grand scheme of things, not a big deal. So Ramiro is at Starfish and I am over here and we are recording this episode. So we have some things that we didn't get to before we went on break. So we're going to touch on those today. Some really in-depth conversations about kids' self-esteem that came from something that a student mentioned, conversations about our past reputation and how much control we have over that at this point. And then talking about what's going on at Starfish since Ramiro came back from spring break this week. So that's our plan for today. Okay, so I know the first thing on our list for today, as I mentioned, comes from comments that somebody made. At this point, it's been a few weeks since this conversation happened. So we are trying our best to remember based on the notes that we took to remember the context of the conversation. And I don't remember what we were talking about at Starfish that week. But the I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm so sorry. It was asking for help.
Oh, okay. Asking for help. Interesting. Okay. I just remember, Ramiro, remind me, what's the first note?
Like failing versus not smart.
Okay. So one thing that's really common in our students and people who are neurodivergent in general, not even just kids, it also stems into adults, is it being really important to have a reputation for being smart. That's very common in the neurodivergent world, to have a reputation for being smart. My personal opinion on that is that a lot of it comes from the fact that people who are neurodivergent, especially people with ADHD, research shows, get a lot more negative feedback as children. And so I think there's those of us who grow up as neurodivergent, we tend to get a lot of feedback about our attention span, about the choices that we make, about our social skills, about our lack of social awareness, about stimming, about just being weird, being annoying, all kinds of things. And so I think that it really causes us to sometimes develop perfectionist tendencies. It causes us to rely a lot on our intellect as being the most important thing about us. And most people who are neurodivergent are quite intelligent, sometimes in less obvious ways. I think every student that we have has some form of really unique intelligence. It may not always be book smart, but it could be. We have kids who are really gifted artists. We have kids who have amazing memories. Even social memories. We have some kids who remember so many things about other people, about things that people have told them or have done. we have kids who are very intuitive and very aware of other people and what they may be feeling or what they may want or need. But this concept of intelligence, I think, becomes king for a lot of the students that we work with. And as I mentioned, it's not even just kids. And in school, neurodivergent kids tend to struggle with, the most common things are reading comprehension. So a lot of times our kids are readers early, even before they go to school, but reading comprehension becomes a struggle, especially as kids get older and things get really abstract. And math past the point where we can do it in our heads becomes really challenging, as well as writing. So those three things tend to be challenges for our kids in school, more so the older they get, because when we're in about up until about third grade, education is pretty concrete. It's numbers, it's adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing. It's learning how to decode and read. It's pretty concrete. And then third grade, around that time, things switch to becoming really abstract. Reading changes from being about learning to read to reading to learn. And so we're having to analyze characters and think about cause and effect and plot summaries and all this kind of stuff. And for our kids who have a hard time with perspective taking to begin with, having to talk about why a character made a certain choice, or, just things like that, can be really difficult. And I mentioned math. I have a math brain. A lot of our kids have a math brain, but it gets to a point where that was just my phone falling on the floor. That's all. That's all that was. I have rigged this whole setup to be able to do this. It lasted for a while. Let me add something to the mix here. Okay. Oh, I love improvising and problem solving. Okay. So math, a lot of us that have math brains are really good at doing math in our head. I can do a lot of math calculations in my head. And unfortunately, that tends to kind of inflate our concept of our math abilities. And then as we get older and math gets more complex and we can no longer just do it in our heads, it really challenges our sense of self. It challenges what we think we're good at and what we think we know about ourselves. So all of that as an introduction to the concept that most of our kids will struggle in school in some area. Reading comprehension, math as it gets more challenging. Some kids always struggle with math. Some of our kids struggle with math from the very beginning. And writing. Writing is either a challenge with the physical act of writing. I personally really don't like physically writing. I do it as infrequently as possible. So some of our kids struggle with the physical act of writing. Some kids struggle with getting their thoughts onto paper because our brains work faster than our hand. And some kids struggle with being able to write things that make sense and are coherent to other people. You may have kids who start a story in the middle of the story and don't understand that other people don't know how that story should be starting, because in their head, it all makes perfect sense. So again, main point is that our students, I don't know that I've ever known a Starfish student who didn't have challenges in some capacity in school, formal education, because of all those reasons. And then you add on to that executive functioning challenges, right? Organization, time management, planning, prioritizing, studying, taking notes, keeping your stuff together, all of that. So yeah, I don't know any of our kids who have gone through school and everything's just been kind of normal. So the conversation came up, this was with one of our elementary groups actually, and I don't quite remember the actual conversation, but a student made a comment about failing on a test, I think, and how she was stupid. And so we hit the brakes on whatever it is that we were talking about in our lesson, because this is a much more important conversation than whatever we were talking about in the lesson. To have this side conversation about how failing at a test has nothing to do with our intellectual ability, nothing. And so we tend to get pretty serious with the kids during conversations like this, because it's so important to Ramiro and me that the kids understand what we're saying, and that they are listening, and that we can get our point across. And so these conversations tend to get serious because it's so important to us to be able to change the way that our kids think about certain things. And this concept is definitely one of those. So we had a really serious conversation about how failing a test has nothing to do with how smart or not smart we are. And another thing that happens in the school system is that school systems are set up as competition. School systems are set up as some kids get really good grades and some kids don't. There's grade point averages, there's valedictorian. I mean, they're set up as a competition amongst kids. It's not set up as cooperation or collaboration. And so that reinforces that need to be smart even more. It's also public information in the classroom, right? Usually, the kids know each other's abilities. The kids know who struggles with reading and who's a really good reader, and who always finishes their math test first, and who's, crying over their math test. So it's not even a secret in a classroom as to who performs well academically and who's struggling. Okay, so that was a really long soapbox. But my point being that our kiddos very often have a skewed vision of their intellectual capacity, because that's not really how school works. School isn't really about your intellectual capacity. It's about your ability to learn and memorize information and follow directions. So conversation was about how failing a test does not relate to our intellectual abilities. Just like failing a driver's test does not mean that we're not capable of learning how to drive. So I think, and from there we kind of went into a conversation about, you're gonna have to remind me again, Ramiro, I'm already.
Oh, you're okay. Yeah, like from there, it kind of somehow it flowed into talking about how making friends in school gets easier as we get older.
Oh, yeah. So this was an elementary group. A couple of the kids are first year middle school, but most of the kids in this group are elementary. And, one of the students made a comment that she would rather have, a better self-esteem than a better education.
Yes.
That's the comment that she made out of her mouth. I would rather have better self-esteem than a better education. Holy cow, right? Oh my gosh. So we talked about how when we're in elementary school, a lot of times our students are the only kids they know who are like them, who think like them, who act like them, who, have amazing strengths and challenges like they do. In elementary school, kids tend to be in the same class with the same peers all year round, all day long. So they're only around maybe 25, 20, 25 other kids. So the chances of there being someone else like them in their class is just not that big, right? There may be other kids in other classes, but they're not always as exposed to them, because in elementary school, we tend to be in the same group the whole day, the whole year. Once we get to middle school, everybody's schedule is different. So we're exposed to different kids in different classes. We also typically have kids that come from other elementary schools that we didn't know from our elementary school. So the pool of kids gets a lot bigger and more diverse, and we have a lot more opportunities to meet and get to know kids that we didn't in elementary school through exposure and through just numbers, right? And then the same in high school. It's another, usually high schools are even bigger than middle schools. And we have kids that maybe came from a different middle school. And we, again, have different schedules. In high school, there's more unique programming. So you may be in band with other kids who share that interest. You may be in color guard. You may be in, art class. So you're more likely to be in classes or clubs or groups with people who share interests with you. So elementary, in my opinion, tends to be more socially isolating for our kids because they don't always know other kids like them. And as they get older, they are more likely to meet other kids like them. The other thing that we really reinforce is the power of Starfish Social Club, because this is where a lot of our kids have their real connections, is at Starfish. This is where they meet other kids who are like them. This is where they enjoy hanging out with other kids. I can't tell you, how many kids I've had tell me that they don't like the other kids in their school or in their class. But at Starfish, they're chatting it up. They're, having conversations and they're laughing. And we've mentioned before, there's times we actually have to intervene in conversations to start class or to get back on topic or whatever, even with kids who in school may be sitting alone at lunch saying nothing to anybody. So that was I hope it was a really powerful conversation for the kids. The challenge is that message has to be repeated. It can't be a one-time thing. They can't just hear it from us one time and then it changes their mindset. That message has to be repeated, that just because they failed a test or just because they're struggling with something in school has nothing to do with their intellectual abilities. And I think there's a lot of generational shifts that happen around school. So a lot of people who are parenting right now, we went through school with the understanding that your performance in school is related to your academic ability, right? I mean, I had the same thing. I got paid for getting A's on my report cards, and there was never an option for me to not go to college, which meant, grades had to be at a certain place. And for me personally, it ended up making me feel like that was my identity. My grades were my identity. And it honestly led me to a lifetime of feeling like my self-worth was tied to my ability to achieve and accomplish things. And I finally broken that cycle only a few years ago. But for most of my life, I lived believing that my self-worth was tied to my accomplishments. And so that would mean if I applied for a job and didn't get it, I even was rejected from grad school. The original grad school I applied for, I got rejected to, and ended up taking 8 months or so of freaking out, and then applied to a different school in a different city and even in a different track than I was originally on. And it all led me here. But I think it can really put our kids on a difficult path for life when they are brought up believing that their sense of self-worth is tied to how well they do in school. And it's not just our kids. I mean, the same thing for neurotypical kids, that's not even just a neurodivergent experience. So I would just caution, if you're a teacher, if you're a parent, I personally don't care at all how our students do on standardized tests, because it does not measure their capacity or their ability. It measures their ability to choose the right question on a test. I remember one year when I was in the school system and I was administering a test, and this kiddo, I was reading it out loud to him, and it was a math question. And this was a long time ago, so I don't remember all the specifics, but one of the answers said something about pizza, and he said, "Oh, I love pizza," and circled that answer. So yeah, there are so many skills that are so much more important and valuable for our kids for the rest of their lives than how they do on an 8th grade reading assessment or a 3rd grade math assessment. That is my very long soapbox about academics. And again, I was a public school teacher for a very long time. I just think there are other things that are so much more important to the quality of our kids' lives than how they do academically. I personally don't believe everybody needs to go to college. I think our kids will be just fine with whatever path they choose for themselves. Okay. That's all I'm going to say about that, because I feel like I've been rambling for quite a while. Ramiro, honey, is there anything that you want to add to that conversation?
I guess, you know, I feel like once the students hear about like your like how they when they hear how you explain that concept to them, they all agree, like I feel like they support each other in that. Like once you talk about how, like their grades aren't everything, or like their grades aren't like they don't define who they are. I feel like that also brings the group of students together in a way. It's like yeah, I'm trying to think of what else.
They all share that experience. You know what I
Yes.
mean?
Yeah.
I think our kids share a lot of experiences that they don't realize they share.
Hmm.
And so yeah, I agree. I hadn't really thought about that, but I agree. It's a unifying concept, right?
Yeah.
Once they hear one student say it, they all can relate to it on some level.
Right. Exactly. But yeah, I think you got it. I think you got all the other points in that scenario though.
It reminded me. So I was thinking about when I'm back next week and we start our module about relationships. We have our younger kids and some of our older kids are doing a module that's based on friendships, so platonic relationships. And we're actually starting a new module for some of our kids who are 14 and older that's about dating and romantic relationships. So this will be the first time that we've done that specifically. But I was thinking about how, the one of the core concepts is our whole program is based around the concept of reputation, and the 3 main reputations that anybody anywhere wants to have is smart, funny, and kind. And so usually one of those is dominant in each person. For our kids, smart really tends to be the one that sticks out the most. But research shows that whether we're talking about friends or whether we're talking about romantic relationships, the number one quality that people look for is someone who's kind. So I've been thinking about that a lot this week as I'm preparing for our lesson next week, is that as much as we want people to think that we're smart, the thing that we look for in other people as a humanity, the thing that we look for in other people is that they're kind. And so I just think that's interesting, because it downplays the significance of feeling like we're smart even more. That's not even the most important thing that people are looking for. So just an interesting tie-in.
Wow, you just blew my mind. I didn't even think about that.
Mind blown emoji. That's funny. Okay, I'm trying to think if there's anything else I want to say about that before we move on to the next topic. I think it's, just going back again to that comment that student made, I'd rather have good self-esteem than a good education. But yeah, as long as I was in the public school system, the world is designed for neurotypical brains because that's the majority. I mean, that's the way it has to be, right? I do personally feel like if you have the ability to find another environment for your child, it could be a charter school. It could be a private school, homeschooling. I'm actually on the board of a charter school group in our city, and they have a very unique school in their what's the word I'm trying to say? They have several different schools, but not all of them are open to enrollment. But the ones that they have are very different. The population of kids there tends to be highly neurodivergent, because they just have a very different model. So it's not, I don't want to be all or nothing about public school. But there are definitely some school leaders and some school environments that are much more conducive to kids who think differently and act differently, and who see that as an advantage, instead of a non-conformity. But I mean, just, the world is set up for people who are typical, because that's kind of the definition of typical, right? Is it's like the majority of people. So yeah, my soapbox about education. Okay. What's next on our list, Romero?
Next is about how our old reputations are what they are, and all we can do is move forward.
So that came from one of the same group, and the elementary group. Somebody made a comment about how maybe it was, I don't quite remember, but maybe it was a reference to how other kids talk about how they used to be, or choices they used to make, or something like that. And so we talked about how that's true, right? I mean, the choices that we used to make are the choices that we used to make. The kid that we used to be is the kid that we used to be. So maybe it was the kid who was overreactive. Maybe it was the kid who was tattling on other kids. Maybe it's the kid who always, was trying to correct other people. That is who we used to be. And people's social memories are based off of the things that happen more frequently, and the things that have the most impact on our memory. So the example that I give sometimes when we talk about this is, if somebody showed up to Starfish in their swimsuit, we would remember that about them. And every time the kids saw that person, they would have that memory, right? So-and-so came to Starfish in a swimsuit. So our social memories focus on things that are consistent about people. Like if you're always getting upset when someone gives you feedback, if you're always correcting other people, even when it doesn't matter. So things that are consistent, and things that stand out, things that are atypical, stand out in our social memory. So yes, if a year ago we were having meltdowns in class, we were correcting the teacher, we were telling on other kids, we were, yelling on the playground, we were constantly, arguing with the teacher, whatever the case may be, that is our reputation. That is what other kids remember about us. And we can't argue about it. There's nothing we can do about the memories other kids have about us. All we can do is form new memories in their brains by changing the way we think and act, if we choose to, right? That's our whole thing about reputation, is that we get to choose what we want it to be. We get to choose if we want to change our reputation or not. But when kids come to Starfish because they're having a hard time making friends, and they understand that there's something they're saying or doing or not saying or not doing that's causing that, they choose to want to change that, right? When you learn that there's a reason, it's the challenge with our kiddos forming connections isn't lack of opportunity, right? Because if you think about lockdown and how neurotypical kids were at home, just like neurodivergent kids were at home, but neurotypical kids were maintaining their texting connections and their FaceTime connections and their, online gaming connection, whatever. So it's not a matter of not being around other kids, which is a big myth and misconception that happens a lot in our world. It's because there's something or things that they are saying or doing or not saying or not doing that is affecting their reputation. And even our kids who everybody likes them, there's probably things they are not saying or not doing that just don't put them in the brains of other kids, right? If they're not joining conversations, if they're not able to talk about things that other kids are interested in, it's not that they're doing anything that's giving them a negative reputation. They're just not doing the things that are giving them a social reputation that would lead to other kids wanting to spend time and hang out with them. So that conversation was about how what people think about us is what they think about us. And the only thing that we can do is make different choices moving forward to start to change that moving forward. That's all that we can do. And I think we even talked a little bit about acknowledging if somebody says, yeah, he always gets upset. We can acknowledge, yeah, I used to always get upset, right? We can acknowledge that. Or she always tells on us. Yeah, I used to always tell on you guys. We can acknowledge it, because again, if we get upset, then we're just feeding that old reputation. But we can acknowledge what our reputation used to be. And then we have to make the choice to make different choices to change what our reputation is moving forward. So that was that conversation, is that what people think about us is what they think about us, but it's based off of things we've said or done. And so the only way to change that is to start saying or doing different things, which is what our whole program is about, right? I mean, that's what the whole program is based on, is showing kids the kind of reputation that they get by making these choices versus the kind of reputation they get by making different choices.
Mhm.
I feel like there was one more thing I wanted to say about that, but it has left my brain. So Romero, do you want to say anything else on that concept? Just the concept of our old reputation versus our new reputation.
Yeah, I mean, I think this, like the conversation that we had, also relates to another conversation that we've had multiple times with different groups. When the students bring up a situation, usually that happens at school, where they have a big reaction to something, or they have, like they get really upset about something happening, or they get really upset at someone who called them a name. And so we talked about how sometimes other kids will pick on the student who has a big reaction because they know that they're going to get a big reaction out of them based on what they say. And so, a lot of the students have realized that because of their big reactions, like that's why it's happening to them. And so we of course encourage them to try to change how they react to things and not have big reactions, so that way they can have a new reputation that doesn't get them to be the target of these comments or of these jokes or whatever it might be that causes them to, or that would cause them to have a big reaction.
That's so true. And that just reminded me of how we have a student at Starfish that has that reputation at Starfish, right? He has a reputation at Starfish of having big reactions, not melting down, yelling, screaming, but you've talked about it, very animated responses, right? Like he watches a lot of cartoons. And the kids even friendly tease him about it at Starfish. And I wonder if this was the same day, because we had a whole conversation. It might have been, and I think we talked about it previously, about how he has that reputation because that's what he does, right? And so when people bring up his reputation and he gets upset, it's just feeding the cycle, right? And so if he wants a different reputation, if he wants kids to stop talking about his reactions, there's only one solution to that, right? Change your reactions. And your reputation stays for a while. I mean, it sticks in people's minds for a while. There has to be a period of time where things are different before people start to believe that things are different. But yeah, I remember having that conversation with him because I would say at this point in Starfish, he's probably the only kiddo I can think of that has a reputation for big reactions at Starfish. I think all the other kids that have come in with that reputation have changed it. Because I can think of lots of our kids who came in with that reputation. But most of them have changed it, but his is still there. So it's helping him realize that he has that reputation because he's created it for himself, and that's the hard thing about reputation is we've created it. Almost always unknowingly, right? I mean, almost always, no matter what even if our reputation is we're the kindest person in the world, we usually created that unknowingly just by saying and doing the things that we say and do. There was something else I wanted to touch on. Oh, I just wanted to add, I've been thinking about us doing something this summer that we've never done before. But this conversation shows why it's such a big thought for me, is I've been thinking about us offering our whole year-round curriculum in a crash course in the summertime. So instead of once a week, it would be once a day. But that would allow kids to leave the end of this school year with one reputation and start next school year with a fresh start, with a bunch of new skills and strategies and mindset and connections to other kids, and be able to start next school year building a new reputation because they've done our whole program in the summer. So I think we're definitely gonna make that an option. It would be on Zoom, so it would be for kids who are anywhere. But it would be 8 weeks in the summer, Monday through Thursday, of an hour a day of our curriculum, instead of 1 day a week like we do it during the school year, but to really help kids make a huge shift over the summer so that next school year can be different. So our time zones are completely different, but Ramiro, I think it is time for you to go to game time. If my time zone it's morning over here. I just woke up a little while ago.
Like the next day after me, right?
Yes, I am on the next day after you. You're correct.
All right.
So yeah, awesome. We'll get this one out there. Have an amazing game time. I know there's some things that we want to talk about on the next episode that have to do with game time this week. So I'm looking forward to end the next episode because I'm not there. You guys will get to hear so much more from Ramiro because I am not at Starfish this week. So I'm really looking forward to hearing all that he has to share and say on the next one. So thank you guys for joining us, and we'll see you again next time.